Starstruck.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Joyride. And I think today we're going to be going on a pretty fun one. But at the moment here, would you agree it's very hot, Adam?
I would say it's just slightly cooler than being on the face of the sun, for what that's worth.
Currently here in Oregon and the rest of the Pacific Northwest, we're having a little bit of a heat wave. It's over, it was 102 last time I checked the thermometer, which is about 40-odd Celsius. And we're not used to that at all.
Not even close.
But the episode we're going to be doing today and the story I will be reading, I think will kind of offset that a little bit because it's got kind of a chilly vibe to it.
And a welcome one at this point.
Exactly. All right, you ready for this?
Yes, I am.
Here we go. So, crack the knuckles here. Our story starts in a frozen and mysterious land thousands of years ago. Archaeologists are fairly certain that humans began migrating to Scandinavia about 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. Even though the ice age was over, places like Norway would still be covered with snow during the cold winter months. And there's no, you can't go into a heated house. There's no, central heating or anything like that. So, yeah. So, this is not fun.
That kind of environment, it's amazing what we have on this planet, and yet it feels like otherworldly with those kind of conditions.
Mm-hmm. So, consequently, trying to get to one point or another was very difficult for these ancient Europeans during the winter. With this in mind, these are probably the only people who have ever been able to genuinely complain about walking up the hill in the snow both ways.
Oh my gosh. Both ways, yeah. That says something.
So the old people of the world, sorry, you kind of lost some points there. As one could imagine, this became such a pain that certain individuals decided they needed to figure out a better way of traveling in the snow. Naturally, innovations in snow travel would follow. Remains of early skis were discovered in places like peat bogs in Sweden, which confirms that skiing was being practiced before recorded history. Evidence suggests skiing may have been practiced as far back as 5,000 years ago in Scandinavia. There's also a possibility it could have been invented in China even earlier, but historians and archaeologists are not sure about this.
That's one that really doesn't get discussed a lot. You watch things on ancient nomads and ancient humans, and, it makes you think, especially in the last ice age, how they were getting around and how they developed maybe some of that technology.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a Indiana Jones movie waiting to happen, too.
Could be the one they're filming right now. Maybe that's why he got injured.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother.
The great mysterious lost ski. So, aside from skiing, another form of snow travel with ancient roots is dog sledding, which possibly developed in Siberia or North America around 2000 BC. In regards to those who did not use dog power, early skiing differed in the sense that only one pole would have been used to propel the traveler compared to two that skiers use today. But nonetheless, the foundations of what would become cross-country skiing had been laid down, of course, also known as Nordic skiing.
Mm-hmm.
So my kind of understanding was this is like, think when you're like punting in that canal in Cambridge, you get that one pole you're just pushing yourself across with.
Making way.
Uh-huh. So, let's see if I... Sondre Norheim, that's my best Norwegian, who lived between 1825 to 1897, is considered to be the father of modern skiing. He was a master of his craft and invented new forms of skiing and skiing equipment. He even invented the modern braces that cross-country skiers use today. It would not take long for intrepid Scandinavians to use their invention to slide dangerously down a hill on things that can only be described as a pair of toothpicks underneath their feet. This speedy form of skiing would travel to the rest of Europe, where it became popular in the Alps by the Victorian period, thus the term alpine skiing.
Oh,
or downhill skiing, of course. Yep.
interesting spin on that.
Have you ever been skiing?
I have, and I've only been a few times. I have a taller frame. I'm 6'4". I don't have a good center of gravity so for me, it did not come easy. I think I spent more time down in the face down in the snow than I did actually on my skis, unfortunately.
So you're saying it's Gandalf coming down the slope?
Yeah, pretty much.
I shall pass.
But I mean, I can see the attraction. I mean, it's a fun sport if you got the knack, and especially if you have the build for it. And needless to say, I mean, most locations are fairly scenic and lots of resorts to explore with that.
Yeah, I never
that sport.
have. I never have like you. I'm a big guy too. I'm about 6'4", and just I don't know. Getting on ice skates, skis. I'm top heavy. I don't like it.
Yeah, and I the same thing. Snowboarding is a lot like skating or skateboarding to a point, and I had the same challenge with that as well. But I can see the appeal for a lot of folks.
I'd try cross country skiing for sure. But it's good you mentioned snowboarding because you kind of foreshadowed something here coming up, so just get ready. Hybrid forms of skiing would also be practiced, the most noteworthy of these being the biathlon. This is where very fit, tall, blonde men strut their stuff 4 kilometers, stop, pick up a rifle, and proceed to fire upon targets in the countryside. And actual targets, not things like, people you don't like. The practice began as a way of training Scandinavian armies, but it eventually became a competitive sport. With time, the biathlon would become an Olympic sport, but as recent as the 1980s, there were still civil services in the Scandinavian countries that trained civilians as part of a military reserve program in the event of an invasion during the Cold War.
Oh, interesting. Let's talk about preparedness on another level there.
Imagine the Russians coming out and what are they doing on all these skis?
See this now? The James Bond movies start making more sense.
Yes, now they do.
Yes.
Yeah. Which one was that? That was For Your Eyes Only.
I think so. Roger Moore.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, there was a no.
Sorry for wrong, but
one of those Roger Moore ones had a pretty extensive
ski chase.
Yeah, ski chase, snow scene.
Nordic, alpine, the biathlon, and the ski jump would all eventually become Olympic sports throughout the early to mid-20th century. Another newcomer to the snow travel scene would be the invention of the snowboard in the late 1960s. Oh. Yep, the contemporary snowboard was invented in 1965 in Michigan by an engineer named Sherman Poppin.
Interesting name. I never would have guessed that on the Jeopardy questionnaire.
He invented it as a toy for his daughters, and his wife initially suggested the device be called the Snurfer.
Snurfer?
Snurfer.
Again, wouldn't have guessed. That's interesting. Now,
a word that was a combination of snow and surfer.
Oh, okay. So the era, that would make sense. Surfing was so large. It's such a big, in-your-face, popular sport, especially amongst the teens, and surf rock and the music to go with it. So that makes sense.
I'm glad that name didn't stick. I don't know. Some of those bros up there might hey, let's go snurfing, dude. Yeah.
Well, Adam West Batman in the 60s didn't make a lot of sense either. So I guess that goes right in line with the times.
Despite the growing presence of snowboarding, it did not become an Olympic sport until 1998. Since then, snowboarding has become immensely popular and a strong rival for traditional skiing. My sister's actually taken up the hobby. She's learning right now. Well, not right now because it's 102, but back in the winter she was.
Oh, okay.
And I have a cousin, Jason. He did a lot of snowboarding. And he's actually done a lot of professional extreme sports. So I've yet to see him do it, but pretty cool stuff.
It is.
However, even with all these improvements in snow transportation over thousands of years, some people thought there might be an even faster way of traveling through a snowy landscape. At about the same time cars and airplanes were making it easier to travel on the road and in the air, something to travel across the snow was a natural addition to this trio. Thus, the snowmobile was born. Early snowmobiles were rather comical inventions. Some resembled motorcycles, while others were just ridiculous. So kind of think of those like old-timey early flight machine black and white things you see. It's about that level of ridiculousness.
Back then, especially, I'm sure that would naturally stand out.
Improvements would come when French engineer Adolphe Quegresset developed a new form of tracks that used a belt instead of pieces of interlocking metal. I think he's a French engineer. I hope I'm correct on that. But these tracks were even fitted to a Rolls-Royce that belonged to the Tsar of Russia, so he could travel around the frozen regions of his empire at a faster pace. Now that's very Russian.
That's extremely Russian.
It's very czarist, very Russian oligarch. It's just like, oh, look at me and my big snow rolls. Flipping off the peasants as he's driving by.
Yes.
It would also become common for Ford Model Ts to be fitted with tracks in the United States, which were used to a certain degree by the Postal Service in the Midwestern states.
Oh, that would make sense.
I have seen one. There actually was one. There's the Air Museum outside of Hood River. It's a cool place, a lot of different planes, but they have a lot of cars in there too. And they had a postal Ford Model T, and it had tracks on the back and skis up front.
Oh, that is neat. I didn't realize they had one out there. I've seen pictures, I think, of that in books, but never one in person.
Whether it be a Rolls-Royce or Model T, a machine tailor-made for passenger travel in snow had yet to be invented. But it was on the mind of an ambitious French-Canadian inventor. Enter Joseph Armand Bombardier.
Well, and I'm sure for those listening, there's another little foreshadow.
Just slightly.
Yep.
Bombardier hailed from the city of Valcourt in Quebec. Quebec, not Quebec. I'm aware of that if you're listening in Quebec. Canada is generally considered to be the father of the snowmobile. His invention to invent a new snow vehicle stemmed from an unfortunate chapter in his life. One day, his young son began to experience appendicitis, but this unfortunately also occurred during a severe blizzard. Because of the blizzard, Bombardier was not able to get to the hospital in time to save his son.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's a heavy one.
Yeah.
After the death of his son, Bombardier created what is considered to be the world's first snowmobile in 1935. It was a large track vehicle that could carry multiple passengers, so kind of think of a bus with tracks. Despite being for passengers, this vehicle was more akin to a snowcat than a personal snowmobile used for recreational riding, in the sense we kind of think of it now. On that note, and closer to home here in Oregon, the Tucker Snowcat Corporation in the city of Grants Pass also has a long history of building snowcats. Tucker Snowcats were even featured in the film National Treasure starring Nicolas Cage. You remember those in the very beginning? Those
I
big
do
ones?
now that you mentioned that.
And I'd also like to point out this is not a callback to the last episode. This is not Preston Tucker. Preston the Terminator Tucker. He comes right at us, Snowcat. I'm back!
Yes, that's good to make that distinction for sure. That's an industrial name, so I know it's attached to a number of items out there.
That would be, I could see him doing that, just not giving up. Like, well, screw cars, I'm going to make snowcats now. But no, unfortunately, that's not the case. So, even though snowcats were a step forward in improving travel in areas with heavy snowfall, they of course are not very practical for personal use. This would all change with a small company originally based in Rousseau, Minnesota, that eventually would become known as Polaris.
Whoa, here we go.
Yes, here we go. Polaris was started by brothers Edgar and Alan Heaton. The company initially built farm equipment, and grain elevators were a prominent part of their business. The business did well, but the minds of the Heaton brothers were always somewhere else. They were both avid outdoorsmen, and this being Minnesota, exploring Mother Nature in the snow was simply a part of life. They would travel across the frozen wilderness of the Midwest on their own 2 feet, much like their Scandinavian ancestors, but they would not do this for much longer. David Johnson and some other employees of the company wanted to figure out a better way of traveling in snowy Minnesota, and since they worked for a farm machinery company, they set out to solve this problem by building a new type of machine. Since this new project would cost money and it had absolutely nothing to do with constructing farm equipment, the plucky innovators had to choose the perfect time in order to construct their dream machine. The time they chose was when Edgar left town for a business trip.
Oh.
It's like, is he gone now?
The coast is clear. Let's do it.
Without any adult supervision, the boys began to build their toy. To propel the vehicle, they did not use metal tracks, but instead decided to be resourceful by using a grain elevator track to propel their snow vehicle.
Well, that's an ingenious spin.
With the track method in place, the small problem of steering the vehicle now became the main question at hand. As early pioneers had already proven, skis were the best method of trying to steer in the snow. There was one problem, however. They had nothing to build skis out of. Being from Minnesota, these lads refused to be deterred even though they had absolutely nothing to work with. Consequently, they used what they presumably had at hand. What might that be, you ask? A pair of bumpers sourced from a Chevrolet car.
Bumpers. Wow. Of course, bumpers back then were 10 times the bumpers they are today.
So we got a great elevator track. We got bumpers from a Chevrolet. I'm just picturing this thing in my head
so
right
am I,
now.
just the imagery.
Yeah. In 1953, they sold their first snowmobile to the bloke who owned a lumber yard who was locally known as Silver Pete. I bet that guy was terrifying.
I would think that he was.
They sold it to him for $465.
Well, that's a lot of money back
Which,
then.
yeah, and I did do the inflation on that. That's about $4,500 today.
Okay.
The machine that was built is now considered to be one of the world's first personal snowmobiles. According to legend, when Edgar returned from his business trip, he was not exactly happy the rogue inventors used the company money to develop something that had nothing to do with farm machinery. However, being the outdoorsman he was, he eventually calmed down and realized there could be a commercial potential for this recreational snow vehicle. During this initial period of the company, the Polaris factory used to be the town's local dance hall. It used to be, it was my understanding. I don't think there was can dancers in the background as they're putting stuff together.
But, again, the era, every town, most little towns, even small ones, had a little dance hall.
I can't focus. Quit dancing around my snowmobile.
Yeah.
I hope not. That'd be funny, though, if it was.
That would be.
With time, though, orders for the new snow vehicle, now called the Snow Traveler, began to increase, and the company was forced to expand its operations by moving to a new facility in 1963. So they got out of the dance hall. Snowmobile sales in the overall industry continued to grow. Bombardier started selling their own personal snowmobile in 1959. It was originally going to be called the Ski Dog, but because of a printing error in the early sales brochures, the name of the snowmobile was printed as Ski-Doo instead of Ski Dog. As luck would have it, the name Ski-Doo just stuck.
Printing error was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, that's kind of like when they're building. This had to have been the same thing when they were building the Leaning Tower of Pisa. You know, the workers go home one night to come back the next morning, the thing's leaning over. Maybe the boss won't notice.
Yeah, we'll go with it.
Back in Minnesota, Edgar led a 1,200-mile expedition across Alaska eventually that originally began in the town of Bethel in order to promote their new product. Even though the trip was a success, the team rarely was able to travel beyond 10 miles per hour. So it was not a speed demon. On an ironic note, since Edgar was routinely being late for various board meetings, the suits at the company began to tire of him not being there. For obvious reasons, Edgar and the board no longer began to see eye to eye. as a result, he would leave the company he co-founded with his brother in order to start another competing snowmobile company.
Ooh.
He would leave Rousseau to set up shop in the town of Thief River Falls, Minnesota. The new company was originally known as Polar Enterprises, but would eventually become known as Arctic Cat.
Here we go.
The first Arctic Cat snowmobile was nicknamed the Tin Lizzie, and both companies continued to compete against each other to this day. Now, this is kind of a personal note, but my family, I grew up snowmobiling, I think, as you know, and we always bought Arctic Cats. But the funny thing was, we did it so much growing up, especially when I was a little kid. I just thought just everyone did this.
Just like everyone had a TV in their house,
yeah,
they had snowmobiles in the driveway or the garage.
Yeah, and that's what he did. My sister was literally almost born on the back of one. we were up at Diamond Lake on a ride when Mom's water broke. So threw the sleds back of the trailer, headed back into town, and not too long later, my sister was born. So
literally in the blood.
Yeah, and she was actually featured, her and my dad, they were actually featured in we took a picture, because it was only a couple months later, whatever it was, we were back on the trail, so my mom took a picture of my dad and my sister was a baby on the snowmobile, and it actually ended up in the Arctic Cat magazine. So,
it did. Oh, that's a pretty cool send-off.
Mm-hmm. As the years had passed, Arctic Cat became particularly famous for the success they experienced in snowmobile racing. This ranged from track-style racing as well as long endurance races that pitted man and machine in a battle of survival against the worst the tundra had to offer. Along with racing, another thing that has made Arctic Cat different from their competitors is that they have always designed and made their own line of winter clothing. This has contributed to the company's brand identity considerably by allowing loyal riders to faithfully sport the neon colors Arctic Cat is known for. The clothing side of the company became so important that the iconic Arctic Cat emblem designed by Bill Nesk was actually designed for the garment division and not for the snowmobiles themselves.
Oh, for the garments.
Mm-hmm. This level of marketing eventually reached a point it was the size of a ship. Literally. This marketing effort occurred during a dealer show where a cruise ship was painted in bright Arctic Cat purple to mark the occasion.
And that's a purple that stands out. I mean, they're you think of the colors, especially that they adopted over the years.
I don't know where they're at, if it was an island or whatnot, but it'd be funny if you just be out there smoking a joint and just going, what kind of ganja is this? It's giant purple this cruise ship, which is a snow thing too, which I thought was kind of ironic.
It is.
Additionally, like any good company, Arctic Cat used promotional films to promote their product. Now, when I was researching this, I found this commercial. I think it was from the 70s. And it was very 70s. It was this guy, comes riding out in the powder. He stops, and these two snow bunnies, these girls, these little skimpy outfits, come over there and I can't remember exactly, but put their arms on his shoulders. I'm just like, that would not fly anymore.
Oh, not even close. Yeah, you think about how some of those promiscuous little ads were back in the day, commonplace. And, the Marlboro Man's right there puffing a cigarette away, right?
Right.
Off to the side. So.
The crossover
episode. Yeah.
This high-energy vibe of the 70s would fuel the explosion of the new winter phenomena of snowmobiling. During the 70s and the early 80s, there were over 100 different snowmobile manufacturers in operation.
I had no idea there was that many.
Yeah. Even Japanese players, including Kawasaki and Yamaha, set up shop in the Midwest. Yamaha originally began as a piano manufacturer and continues to produce musical instruments to this day, but they're also one of the world's largest snowmobile manufacturers in the world.
And they do. I mean, that's one, I can't say for today, you go out there, who you see more than others, but that's one I personally had experience with years ago, which we can get into later. But, Yamaha made an interesting sled, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very diverse company. In one regard, they're making pianos for Elton John. And then snowmobiles for somebody over in North America.
I mean, you think of how much stuff and electronic equipment. I mean, it's Very diverse.
All right, you ready for this next little
I'm ready.
tidbit? John Deere, the heavy equipment manufacturer, even began to build its own line of performance snowmobiles in 1972, and the company's famous slogan, "Nothing runs like a deer," was not used for their main tractor division, but instead for their newly formed snowmobile division.
The origins of that are interesting.
Now we're laughing at this because both me and Adam used to work for a John Deere dealer. So,
Yeah, and I know back when we were working there, I can't remember who brought in the ad, one of those old ads. I think it was actually at the McMinnville store. Joe Billingsley, I think, brought in one of the old ads that showed the John Deere snowmobile, in a magazine, and it was pretty interesting.
Liquefier was one of them. I think Liquefier or Spitfire, something like that.
Yep.
As fun as all this may sound, unfortunately, all things eventually have to come to an end. The 1980s had arrived, and with it came both a minor recession and a period of poor snowfall. Neither of these misfortunes were good for the snowmobile industry. As a result, most of the smaller manufacturers were forced to shut down, so that's why you don't see as many anymore. Many snowmobile producers either declared bankruptcy or fled from the market. John Deere decided to leave the market during this economic period, but also because the head of the snowmobile division, Robert Carlson, left to work for Polaris.
Interesting.
As an interesting side note, Polaris decades later would find an experimental John Deere snowmobile left over from the Carlson period that would prove to be the first example of such a machine to feature independent rear suspension.
Oh, no, that's an interesting fact. And so Deere was the one experimenting with that.
Now, since you are our technical wizard on this show, Adam, can you explain to our listeners who don't know what independent rear suspension is?
So I guess to put it in layman's terms the best as I can, independent rear suspension is where it has its own isolated spring, coil, strut assembly. It can vary, but bottom line is it has its own suspension system for that one axis or that one portion of the sled. So like for your car, you have shock in the front, each tire, each wheel has a shock attached to each, tire and wheel. On a sled, it's a little different. So it would have, just very similar to a motorcycle, the back portion by itself has its own shock absorber.
John Deere and the other smaller manufacturers were not the only ones to suffer, though. Even one of the kings in the industry also experienced a tragic period in their history. Arctic Cat was not doing well. The company, on a very fateful day, declared bankruptcy in 1982. No longer would the graceful cats of the Arctic sprint across a snow-covered paradise anymore. Or so we thought. Shortly after the company went bankrupt, a loyal group of employees managed to gather enough financing to have new snowmobiles rolling off the assembly line in only 2 years later in 1984. The 2 years where new models were not in production are referred to as the gone fishing years within the company.
Good play off there.
As both the economy and snow improved, the future looked much brighter for the entire snowmobile industry. Even though most of the other companies were no longer in business, Arctic Cat was back on its feet, and snowmobiling actually became more popular than ever. By the mid-1990s, more snowmobiles had been sold than ever before. Arctic Cat broke innovative ground when they introduced a four-stroke powered sled in 1998. Now, most snowmobiles, they're switching over. A lot of them are now four-stroke, but forever they were always two-stroke. So once again, Adam, what is the difference between a two-stroke engine and a four-stroke engine?
Again, this one can get into more in-depth, but simplicity, for simplicity's sense, a two-stroke engine is an engine that fires on every second stroke. So every second rotation of the engine, there's a power stroke. On a four-stroke engine, it's one in every 4 rotations, there's actually a power stroke. And the other big difference is, a two-stroke engine combines strokes into one, versus on a four-stroke, you have to get the intake, compression, power, or separate strokes there. So it's it's isolated.
And there's I think the biggest like the most standout thing for the consumer is you don't have to mix the oil for a 4-stroke. Well, mix the oil and gas like you do with a 2-stroke, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's on a 2-stroke engine in typical terms, it utilizes the lubrication is obtained from the actual oil in the fuel. Where on a 4-stroke engine, it's completely separate. It has its own crankcase, and the fuel is just straight fuel. You don't have to do any type of mix. So
Gotcha.
a lot easier for fueling purposes.
Even though Arctic Cat would become the first to produce a 4-stroke snowmobile, it would be Yamaha who would eventually commit to this design the most. Now, not everyone in my family prefers an Arctic Cat, I'd like to point out. My Aunt Linda always loved her Yamaha Phaser, so that was, which was a very, very like 1980s, 1990s looking sled too. It really stood out from all the other ones.
It did. Yeah, it did. I remember seeing those.
Now, as of the present day, there are 4 major snowmobile manufacturers. The likes of Kawasaki are no longer in production, so the big 4 manufacturers in alphabetical order are Arctic Cat, Bombardier, which produces the Ski-Doo brand, of course, like we talked about. They also bought a Finnish manufacturer named Lynx.
Oh,
yeah, which I don't think they ever sold them over here, as far as my knowledge, but that is the European equivalent manufacturer over there. Polaris, and, of course, Yamaha. All these companies have also diversified into other vehicles, such as ATVs, as the decades have passed. Bombardier has even expanded into the train and aerospace industries and has become a major private jet manufacturer.
That's what I've heard, and which is amazing, making that kind of transition.
Yeah, and it started out as a snowmobile company.
Oh, jeez.
There are also more specialty snowmobile manufacturers currently operating. This includes the Italian-based Alpina. These machines are not meant for personal transportation or recreation, but are much larger dual-track machines intended for more utilitarian purposes. So like think winter resort kind of things. The snowmobile companies are also looking into the future, much like the automotive industry, by implementing electric motors compared to using internal combustion engines. Currently, there's a startup in Canada, I think this is how you say it, Taiga Motors, which is working on a series of electrical off-road vehicles, including snowmobiles. So electric sleds. Which I thought, I remember people we rode with, I brought that up and go, oh, it'll never happen. They're too heavy. I mean, there's too much snow, there's too much water. Well, I guess someone figured it out. So,
Yeah.
With that said, it is now time we apply the brakes and slowly come to a stop. For many people around the world, a snowmobile is their everyday form of transportation. They are detrimental to delivering vital supplies in isolated communities in places like Alaska, Sweden, and Iceland. But for most of us, they are used for recreation. Above all else, whether you're zooming down a snow track, winning a race, or out on the trail making memories with friends and family, one thing is for certain. If you want to go for a joyride, a snowmobile is an excellent choice.
It is, and also a fun experimental choice compared to most.
Yes. And now that is the end of our story. And I have to ask you, Adam, you kind of briefly went into it. Have you ridden a sled before?
Yes, and it was, and forgive me on the exact model, it was a Yamaha. I would believe it was a 1986 and a 1987 model Yamaha sled. Back when I was in high school, my folks had a car lot and actually took in a pair of sleds on a car trade. And as a result, well, we had some fun with those. And anyhow, the client where I lived at the time, Ellensburg, Washington, we got snow routinely in the wintertime, and we had a nice open field. And a couple buddies of mine, we took those sleds out and had some good fun. And we were doing lots of donuts with the sleds. And in fact, we were doing so many of them, we got the brake rotors so hot that they actually caught fire. And we had to, we just put it out with the snow. But anyhow, this happened a couple times. And as that went on, coincidentally, on one of the sleds, the throttle started to stick. And so when that happened, I'm like, whoa. We pulled over, stopped the sled, turned it off. I went and got a couple tools to adjust the throttle linkage to see if I could fix it. Well, anyhow, as I'm doing that, my buddy who was riding the sled is standing beside me, and my other friend is on another sled, still riding around in the field because that one was operating, fine without issue. And so as he's riding around in front of us, about I'd say 50 yards away, we're working on the sled. We fire it up, start tapping the throttle, making adjustments. Well, as I'm making an adjustment, my buddy who is standing beside me, he decides to hit the throttle without me knowing. And when he did that, the throttle stuck, the sled takes off on its own. And I'm standing there in total shock as I watch my buddy now chase after the sled, looks back at me, and this sled is now autonomous on its own, full throttle, wide open throttle, stuck throttle, going out of the field. My other friend is circling around, and he's about in time to come into contact with the sled. Luckily, and he's completely oblivious, by the way. He didn't even see the sled take off. Again, they're very loud. So, naturally, you wouldn't even hear it. Luckily, he continues in his path and does not circle back, and the sled misses him by about 10 feet and goes straight into our fence. Luckily, it takes out the fence pole, took out most of the impact, goes straight up in the air, breaks the sled off, it falls on its side, because the only thing to stop it other than that would have been the irrigation ditch in the farmer's next field. So anyhow, it was a crazy day. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but it could have been a lot worse. Yeah. So that was one of my more memorable snowmobiling events.
I got lots of fond memories and whatnot, but nothing, I have to admit, nothing quite that comedically.
It was. I was in utter shock standing there looking at my buddy look back at me because he felt immediately bad, but I'm going, are we going to watch somebody, I hate to say it, get severely injured or worse? It was crazy. Now we can reflect back on how that was, it's fairly comical, yeah. But boy, at the time, it's just, and boy, did my friend feel bad after that. He really apologized, and it was, I go, well, hey, could have been worse, right? So take it with a grain of salt.
You ever see that movie Sideways?
Yes.
That makes me think of that Saab, which is barely.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. Well, and anyone that's been, it doesn't matter if you're in a car, on a motorcycle, a four-wheeler, any type of motorized vehicle, when the throttle sticks, that's an eerie feeling, and it's even more eerie when you watch the vehicle go off by itself with no pilot, no navigator, no control. So
that kind of segue from that. I'm glad you mentioned that because we'll kind of move into the movie portion of this discussion. There was an old Disney movie that my mom and dad got when I was a little kid. It was like from the 70s, I think. It was called Snowball Express. And it had, was it Dean Jones? Was he the one in the Love Bug?
Yes,
something like
I
that.
think it was. Yep.
Yeah, he was in this too. And just long story short, his family moved out to this. He inherits this derelict hotel in Colorado, and he's this guy from New York City. Mind you, it's an old Disney from this movie from the 70s, so I'm not saying it's phenomenal, but there's a scene at the very end of it where he's on a snowmobile and the throttle gets stuck.
Oh, gosh.
But back then, like I said, that was kind of like everyone, we had that movie, we're always snowmobiling, so just like, this is normal. It's not, this is
everyone does this, right?
Yeah. That's when I'm like 6, Let's see, what else? There's been some James Bond stuff where it was very brief. I believe very briefly he rode a Ski-Doo in Die Another Day.
Yes, that would have been one. There's a lot of Bond films. It's amazing now when you get onto some of these vehicle subjects of how often random things made an appearance like that in some of those films. It really is.
Yeah, and of course you can't forget Grumpy Old Man.
Oh,
that actually had an Arctic Cat in it too.
Well, that one was Arctic Cat.
Yeah,
okay.
It was, yeah. But yeah. So do you have anything else to add, Adam?
Well, just on the side, it's just amazing, and we covered an interesting history and origin on the machine itself. It's just it's amazing the variety and range of power that some of these snowmobiles have. Is the only other thing I wanted to throw in. And I know you and I were on fairly conservative standard stock machines probably for the most part, but I guess it's a whole nother subject on its own of how modified some of these snowmobiles can get, and snowcross in the X Games, and some of the extreme events and sports people utilize them in. It's pretty amazing. You never would have thought back when a vehicle like that was being first introduced that it would be used in such extreme sports and displays that it has today.
Actually, I had a fairly powerful sled. It was a 700 powder special, so 700 cc's.
Oh wow!
Big ones. I'm sure there's big ones are like well up to like 1,000 cc's, so 1 liter engines. Which is not, which sounds small, but when you're putting in something that basically weighs nothing, that's a lot of power.
Well, it is, and when I was going to high school in Ellensburg, again, you had the climate because you consistently got a good amount of snow in that valley. I knew people that had modified sleds with turbochargers. These are 2-strokes, especially some of the Bombardiers that were producing upwards of 300 horsepower at that time. And this is going back 20 years ago. I mean, so it's pretty amazing the power some people could get out of those. And today even, I mean, it's just mind-blowing.
Well, for our concluding statements, our next episode is going to be a car. We will be returning to that topic again, but it's going to be a very early car. And I'll give one small hint. It is not the Ford Model T.
Ooh.
Yes. And, of course, by all means, pass this on to your friends. Tell them about the podcast, why you like it. Also, give us a good review. We like good reviews, obviously. We're on Patreon. We appreciate anything you can do for us in that way in order to keep this podcast going. So, with that said, I think we're going to tune out, Adam.
Well, till next time.
Till next time. All right, everyone. See ya.
Bye.
Stop.